I am recording now, so we can jump in whenever we want.
Welcome back to the D3 Datacast. It's a quick turnaround for us. We got our initial bracket reveal reactions and quick thoughts out Monday, and now we're back here with our regular show that is usually dropping on a Monday morning, but we're getting that out on a Tuesday morning just because of the bracket reveal. And so this will feel familiar for those of you who have been with us throughout this year, and thank you if you have. Hopefully you've subscribed by now. If not, please consider clicking the subscribe button. And following us on other social media channels. We're on Twitter at D3Datacast and Facebook.com/D3Datacast. So Matt, as we usually do, let's start with your top 25. Although I'm not sure that there is a top 25 that drops that has as little hype as this one. The actual top 25 did come out Monday afternoon after the bracket reveal. So let's go ahead and take a look at your ballot, although probably no one cares. Let's go.
Yeah, I was spending Sunday watching conference championship games, updating my spreadsheets after every result, getting ready to do the Hoopsville mock selection appearance, and then the email pops up, D3 Sports, their weekly, hey, get ready to submit your top 25. And I just was thinking, like, I knew it was coming, but it was just completely off my radar for the day. And to be honest, I had a scheduled day off from work on Monday. Being selection Monday, I knew I was going to be busy with a whole bunch of stuff. So I just immediately thought, I'm just going to do this on Monday morning. It's going to be fine. And I did. And that works out for our episode this week. I think recording an episode released Monday morning before the brackets came out would have been very, whatever we had come up with would have only had a shelf life of a couple of hours. So good that we're doing a Tuesday release. Also gave me a little bit extra time to step aside from mock selections, Pool C, and get a top 25 ballot going. So here's what I came up with this week. Stayed with Randolph-Macon number one, a change that I had made for a while. Even though St. Joseph had been undefeated, St. Joseph did end up taking their first loss to Albertus Magnus. But for me, they still stayed at a number two. I think I was comfortable with them being a number two. We were kind of maybe expecting a loss to come at some point in the season, and we said it might be to someone like Albertus Magnus in that conference. It happened to be in the conference championship game. But I'm okay with them rolling into the tournament as one of my favorites in the whole thing. I think they're still really good. Other than that, the top 5 or 10 stayed pretty constant. Maybe Wheaton dropping out of that is one of the bigger movers in that part of the bracket after losing the semifinal in the CCIW tournament. Case comes up to number 10. UW-Oshkosh sitting there at number 9. I think maybe they fell a couple of spots after losing the final in the WIAC. And Swarthmore, Hopkins staying really close to each other, 7-8. Did maybe drop Guilford a few spots, even though they made a run to the ODAC championship game, but still at number 12. We saw Guilford not make the tournament in the bracket reveal, and being number 12 here in my ballot, I still think of them as a great team. They would have been a worthy inclusion in an absolute sense. I know they had probably some criteria issues in getting the committee to select them, but they're a great team. So I'm not going to take them off my ballot just because they didn't make the tournament. After that, I had NYU make a pretty good jump to number 16. North Park up to number 17. I think they've looked impressive lately, and me getting them in here I think is well past time. And then coming up to the end, I think a bunch of these other teams, kind of 18, 19, 20. John Carroll, Rowan, Middlebury have been in my ballot for a while. Williams, Carleton in at 22. I think they've been impressive in their MIAC play. And me getting them into my ballot feels good. Hopefully they can make some noise in the tournament. UW-Whitewater, similarly in the WIAC, they were kind of third, fourth fiddle most of the year. They've had a really good second half of the WIAC conference tournament. Really great run to win that. They look strong. I don't think anyone wants to play UW-Whitewater. Calvin, similar to Guilford, they stuck in for me at number 24. They're not going to make the tournament, but they're here at the end of my ballot. They've unfortunately didn't have the resume to get in, lost a couple of games late in the season, both to rival Hope. But their overall season body of work, I think for me, back end of the top 25 is where I was comfortable with them. And then St. Thomas, Texas, they were another bid thief. They had suffered a defeat in the SCAC conference tournament, and they will enter the national tournament as an at-large. But to me, they did just cling into my last spot there at number 25. So that is my ballot. That's my thoughts on the top 25, and I'm excited to roll into our NCAA tournament.
Yeah, Guilford's obviously the big one. In our other discussion, just immediately following the bracket reveal, we looked at some other ranking methods and where Guilford would be, the third or fourth team off the board on those. And then they've been pretty strong in the top 25 all year.
Mhm.
I know you have them here at 12. I know, I think Ryan Scott still had him inside his top 10. And Mike Rainiak tweeted that he's just going to keep voting for Guilford. He doesn't care that he's not in the tournament. And I think that that's right. It became pretty clear that Guilford was going to have a NCAA criteria problem, but
Yeah.
uh, it just one of those unfortunate cases where the criteria doesn't have them looking as strong as other ranking methods, and people who have followed the D3 basketball scene all season know that they are. And I got to say, I think I'm not a voter, but I think the only real philosophy that needs to be held true is whoever wins the tournament deserves the right to be voted number one at the end, and every other spot after that is totally up for grabs. So hey, if you want to say Guilford's number two at the end of this, if Randolph-Macon wins it, and the biggest mark on Guilford's record is they lost to Randolph-Macon 3 times, and you want to vote
Yeah.
them second,
Yeah.
go right ahead. Doesn't matter that they weren't in the tournament. So you have Guilford 12. I think Rainiac also had him 12. I think they actually came in at 13 in the final poll. So a lot of consensus, it seems to be what the quality of Guilford is, regardless of what the NCAA criteria says.
Yeah, they're a great team, like you said. Lost to Randolph-Macon 3 times. Randolph-Macon is like the best team in Division Three again, and two of those losses were, I think, a single possession, maybe like 3 points. I mean, at some point, you want a team to maybe win a game. I get that. I think the selection committee would have gotten them in if they had beaten Randolph-Macon once. So there was opportunities there to get in the tournament. That's fine.
Sure.
But yeah, they're a great team. And unfortunately, that they're not able to play in March. But that's what it is.
Well, like I said, this is probably the top 25 that people care the least about. So
Yeah.
let's get into the tournament. We want to go through the different pods here and take a look primarily at the first round matchups that we have. So we'll start with the Randolph-Macon quadrant. And what we're presenting here is just a look at each pod, each game within the pod. And then what we're bringing in to evaluate each game are the efficiency ratings, Matt, that you've tracked the whole year. So presented here, you see the rank, which just represents their overall rank, the total efficiency margin score, and then that's derived from the adjusted offensive efficiency number and the adjusted defensive number. And it just not something that matters so much, but just a point of interest is the adjusted tempo. So you can get that's a measure that you can see which teams play faster, which teams play slower. And then based on all that computer data, we can project a win probability for each one. And then we also ran these through the same computer line that we've been using throughout the season as we've done our pick slate. Um, we'll get to a usual 5-game pick slate later, but we just wanted to present that here with what that computer line would be for each game. So Matt, you want to take us through it a little bit more in depth there, starting with Randolph-Macon with Wilson, hosting that pod at Crenshaw, where they look to keep their home winning streak alive.
Yeah, so right off the top here, Randolph-Macon, they're the number one team in the efficiency ratings. Wilson checks in at number 149. So this is kind of like a 1 versus 16 matchup like you might see in Division One. So you expect it to be kind of a mismatch, and that's a little bit what it looks like here. Randolph-Macon's efficiency margin is plus 34. What that means is they would be expected to outscore an average team by 34 points in a 100 possession span. So that's just kind of it my efficiency ratings normalize everything to 100 possessions. And again, for people not familiar with my efficiency ratings, it's like the Ken Pomeroy ratings from Division One. I kind of tried to steal what he does and take it to Division Three. The adjusted offensive rating is how many points your team would be likely to score per 100 possessions. Defensive ratings, how much you're likely to give up in 100 possessions, again, to an average team. So you can kind of, how the predictions work is they would take a team's defense versus their opponent's offense and get an expected kind of score for that team, and then vice versa on the other side of the ball, and then so you could turn that into like a scoring margin and then a percent likelihood to win. So based on the efficiency margins here of kind of a Randolph-Macon number 34, number one overall, Wilson number 49, a plus 4.5 efficiency margin. The computer thinks that Randolph-Macon has a 95% chance to win, and Wilson has a 5% chance to win that game. And the computer's projecting a scoring line of 22 points favoring Randolph-Macon. Interesting to look here at the adjusted tempos. Randolph-Macon averages 66.5 possessions per game, or I should say that's what their tendency would be to play 66.5 possessions per game. That tries to take out how fast your opponents want to play. So if you played a system team like Grinnell or Greenville, that wouldn't make you look faster just because your opponent likes to play faster. So that's the adjusted nature of some of these metrics. But 66 is quite slow. I think an average Division III team plays at about 73, 74 possessions per game. So Randolph-Macon tends to limit the possessions a little bit. So I think usually, you can do that in a couple of ways. You could play more deliberate offense where you're just trying to, move the ball and get one good shot, maybe in a shot clock, and just keep working the defense until they make a mistake and you get an open look or you get a shot at the basket. You could limit it by just playing really good defense, making it hard for the opponents to get good looks. Some combination of both of those things is probably what a team like Randolph-Macon is doing. Wilson at 69 possessions also is fairly slow. So put those together, you expect this to be a slow-paced game. You wouldn't be surprised if this ends up in the mid to low 60s in possessions, probably if both teams are okay slowing it down. So this could be a lower score. Now, the mismatch nature of it means Randolph-Macon, it might not be too low of a score because Randolph-Macon can score the heck out of the ball. But that's kind of what this whole all these metrics are kind of showing you. Kind of read into what a team might like to do on offense, what their defense might look like, and how the game might play out from a speed perspective. Now, it doesn't really tell you if they like to pound the paint or they like to shoot the three necessarily, but just not how they like to score the ball or prevent the other team from scoring, but that they do or do not in some regard.
Yep. And then in that same pod, the next game between Scranton and North Carolina Wesleyan is actually a really interesting one. You can see it's fairly even. North Carolina Wesleyan does have a 57% win probability advantage here, but just a 1.5 point differential on the spread. North Carolina Wesleyan, Matt, I think I had joked to you early in the season that they might be the best Wesleyan this season, and sure enough, here they are in the tournament. While a lot of the other power Wesleyans are not at home. So I'm not exactly sure how the seeding may have worked out with this in terms of the actual committee, but this would be a really interesting kind of 2-3 matchup here.
Yeah, you're right. I like to think of pods as a 1 versus a 4 and a 2 versus a 3. Scranton by seed is probably the 2 here, and NC Wesleyan is probably the 3.
Right.
But the efficiency, then that's kind of more based on an NCAA selection criteria kind of a seeding. But by
Right.
the efficiency ratings, this says, hey, North Carolina Wesleyan is a pretty good team, and they're a slight favorite here. You see 57 to 43%. So this is going to be a really great game. I also think it contrasts in styles a little bit to the Randolph-Macon Wilson game, where if you look at the ratings, Randolph-Macon and Wilson might be a little bit more defensively inclined, and you can see Scranton and their defense at 100.2 is basically average, but they have a really good offense. And NC Wesleyan is maybe a little bit more balanced with a pretty good offense and a fairly decent defense. But a team like Scranton is maybe more on the offensive side of things, where a team like Wilson, although maybe not quite as good overall, their strength is a little bit more toward the defense than the offense. So contrasting styles, I think, between game 1 and game 2 a little bit.
And then as we get into the Oswego State pod, I think we see an even bigger example of where maybe the NCAA criteria and the efficiency margin ranking diverge here because on paper, I think that John Carroll would be a very strong 2 in this pod,
Yeah.
and Albertus Magnus would be seen as like a weaker 3. But if you look at their computer rank, and this is something we've kind of been tracking through the whole year, as you know, you've noted that the computers have been a little bit lower on John Carroll
Mm-hmm.
throughout the year. I know top 25 voters started pretty slow, just with all the transfers they have coming in and wanting to see some results before just declaring that yes, they're going to be great. Um, and those adjustments quickly came, except for on the computer side, that's been a little bit different. And so it might be a surprise to some to see them rank 37th here, which doesn't leave a big gap ahead of Albertus Magnus at 52. And then you see that reflected in how the computer sees the result here with a 56-44 win probability split and a computer line, or think of it like a betting spread of just a 1 point favorite for John Carroll.
Yeah, I'll admit I don't exactly know what it is about the computers, both my efficiency ratings that you see here and the Massey ratings, those to a lower degree, haven't been as high on John Carroll as the human voters. I'm inclined to say it's probably that there's something the efficiency ratings isn't maybe quite capturing that maybe the human voters do have a handle on. I think John Carroll's probably better than number 37 is I guess what I'm trying to say, even though that's what their results and the computer kind of calculates based on who they've played and how they played them and everything in an objective matter. That doesn't mean it's correct. It just means it's using objective data to make that decision. It's probably too low on John Carroll, but yeah, it's how much too low I don't know. They've been an interesting case all year in that the computer ratings have lagged a little bit, but this will be a good matchup. I think the whole bracket this year is going to be a good matchup. So I'm going to say that 1,000 times during this episode. I'm sorry. This is going to be a good matchup.
We'll call this one a sneaky good matchup.
Yeah, a sneaky good
Because I
matchup.
don't think people would look at John Carroll Albertus Magnus on paper,
Yeah.
even with what Albertus Magnus did in even reaching the tournament by
Right.
beating St. Joseph in the GNAC tournament championship. I don't think that people would look at this on paper and be like, "Oh yeah, that's going to be a good one."
Yeah,
But
because by the
here's
NCAA
reason to believe it might be.
selection criteria, we thought John Carroll had a good chance of hosting a pod. They could have been kind of a host, and Albertus Magnus wasn't getting in unless they had beaten St. Joseph in the GNAC, and kind of thought like, hey, they're like a kind of like a 4-ish in a pod. Like that might have been a game that John Carroll had drawn if they were a host, still kind of like Albertus Magnus. But by the computer ratings, they're pretty tight, fairly. So we'll see how this goes. They're both a little bit above average in tempo, so this could be a fast-paced game. They're not super fast teams, but they don't mind pushing it a little bit. So this could be, an 80-possession game or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised. Both teams are fairly even between offense and defense, so we'll kind of see how things play out. But this is a really good one to watch on day one.
And contrast that with Oswego here hosting the pod. They've been one that the computer's been really high on all year, probably higher than the human voters. Although Oswego is number 6 here in this final top 25 heading into the conference, into the NCAA tournament. But here another kind of classic top seed versus lower seed, another 95-5 win probability split with a 21 point computer line over Marymount of Virginia.
Yeah, really excited to see what Oswego does. I've been starting to vote them pretty high. I think a lot of the other human voters have been too. The computers have liked Oswego for a long time, so they'll get their chance in the tournament to kind of prove themselves. Potential, what would it be? Sweet 16 matchup with Randolph-Macon. That would be a great game. They have to get through, either John Carroll or Albertus Magnus in the second round. To say nothing about Marymount in the first round, but would really love to see what to make of Oswego State on the national stage, because the computer believes in them. I've been voting them high too, and it'd be good to see them in these matchups.
So the third pod in this quadrant has a pretty familiar shape with the previous pod there, with a fairly even matchup between Hamilton and Montclair State. And then Johns Hopkins, a pretty overwhelming favorite over Mitchell. Now, Mitchell's put up some pretty impressive results, although you have to question the type of teams they've been putting him up against.
Yeah, Mitchell's a lot better than the really bad teams they've played, but I don't think that tells us very much. It'd be very fun if they can make this a good game with Johns Hopkins. We know that Tom Quarry won't be able to play for Johns Hopkins. Now they've done great without him. Shout out to Tom
Quarry. Yep. Hey Tom.
He's been a follower. Watching, he was participated in watching our live stream for a little while. He was on the QCast where he put me on blast about picking them as a dubious team on Hoopsville. So I would expect Hopkins to win, but I was curious to see where Mitchell would end up and to see how that game goes, just because of I think they've dominated the really weak competition they've played. So it'll be interesting to see them play a Hopkins, a top team nationally. And then Hamilton Montclair is just a really nice first round game, a very even matchup that you love to see. That could really go either way.
Yeah, Matt, when I picture you getting dunked on by an actual D3 hooper, that wasn't really what I had in mind with when Tom put you on blast there. But hey, sad to see Tom Corey will be out for the year and not participating. But as he was quick to remind us, they're a deep team.
Yeah,
Johns Hopkins still has plenty of dreams and aspirations to play for, so look out for them. They're set up very nicely in this pod, I might add.
for sure.
And then the final pod in the Randolph-Macon quadrant will be hosted by Case Western Reserve. They play Arcadia. Not quite as big of a favorite as some of the other top seeds in the other pods, but should be a fairly comfortable game for them. Case has really emerged as one of the top offensive teams, and you see that reflected in their offensive efficiency number here of 120. Defense is a little bit more average, so you never know what could happen. You have one of those days where maybe you're not shooting quite as well as you're used to, and things could get a little bit interesting. But don't expect them to have a lot of trouble. But in the other game there, one of the more interesting ones, Wisconsin-Whitewater made their run through the WIAC tournament to get the Pool A bid out of the WIAC, and they will play Wabash, who I'll be honest, I'm a little bit surprised to see them ranked 92nd here by the computer. But they're another, maybe it's because of that defensive number, another pretty really good offensive team, but one that struggles defensively, at least in terms of the efficiency metrics there.
Yeah, the efficiency ratings has not liked Wabash's defense. That was true last year as well. Even though we saw them make a run to the Final Four, the computer ratings was still kind of saying like, I don't know, fringe top 25 team maybe. So that's probably another case of the computer not quite capturing something about Wabash that's helping them win. Maybe I don't know, but you see it here again. Wabash's defense is below average by the computer, even though they have a very kind of elite level offense. I will have to say about this whole pod, though, this is probably the best offensive pod in the whole tournament, with every team sitting there above average, even who's the lowest rated team in the pod, Arcadia, still being within their own realm, kind of an offensive team, even though a little bit more balanced. So it just occurred to me looking at this in this format, haven't looked at the whole tournament, but I would be shocked if there was a total pod that was as good offensively as this pod. Not going to be a ton of defense played here. Look at the best defensive team is Whitewater at a 97. That's kind of only average-ish, but it's going to be a lot of points scored. So if you like points, head down to Case. You'll see a ton scored probably.
Yeah, compare that 97 being the best defensive number here to the Oswego pod, where they're all better than that.
Yeah, they're all good defenses.
So that's the defense pod. The Case Western Reserve pod is the offense pod.
Yep. Although these teams are all slightly slower than average, so maybe the point totals will be tempered a little bit. But offensively, as far as a per possession scoring pace, they can put it in the hoop.
All right, so moving to the next quadrant, staying on what you will see as the left side of the bracket. We'll call this the Rowan quadrant. Rowan will host Cal Lutheran in one of those really interesting matchups where we see California teams or West Coast teams flown well east. Cal Lu, a surprise Pool A out of the SCIAC. You had a trio of teams that were probably looking at potential Pool C bids if you figure one of the other three was going to win it. I don't think a lot of people thought that Cal Lu would be making the run that they did, but here they are, and congratulations to them. Their reward is a trip to one of the other number one seeds. But a little bit more evenly matched, so to speak, compared to the other ones we looked at. The computer sees us as a 86-41 win probability game for Rowan with a computer line of 15.
Yeah, for kind of like a 116 type of a game, this one is more even than you're used to seeing. Rowan, another team that the NCAA selection criteria favors more than the efficiency ratings. Efficiency ratings thinks they're a good team. Team I've been voting at the back part of my top 25 at times. and computers see them as number 22. So a good team, but not maybe tip top elite. So Cal Lutheran could sneak up if you're looking for a host that could fall even in the opening round. Maybe it's this game. Who knows? I think Rowan's still a solid favorite. You see they're 86%, but that could be one that maybe turns out differently. And we've seen Cal Lutheran win some big games recently. The other one, Utica and Babson, definitely a more even matchup, 56-44. So that'll be a good one to watch as well. All of these teams kind of fairly balanced as far as offense and defense. Cal Lu maybe a little bit more towards an offensive team, but I think it's a well balanced pod, and it's a fairly even pod as far as who might even get out of this one after the opening round.
And we figure Utica's probably the last Pool C team, and you see him here with matchup with Babson in a fairly even matchup. So at least from that, doesn't feel like the committee necessarily got it wrong, because you slot them in and they're getting a fairly even game against the new MAC champ. All right, moving on to the next pod that will be hosted at Wisconsin Oshkosh. I guess you would call it a 2-3, although I know we talked earlier in our reactions episode that maybe this was a little bit of a soft seeding here. Hope against Bethany Lutheran, although I got to we should point out here the computer likes Bethany Lutheran by a slim margin here, but we have enough firsthand knowledge of what's been going on at Hope this year. They entered the season with a ton of expectations, bringing back a lot from a very good year they had last year. Didn't quite get off to the start that many thought that they would. Dealt with a ton of injuries with people in and out of the lineup most of the year, but it seems that they have put it all together where they're starting to get to the point where they could meet those expectations from earlier in the season. And that's something that's probably not going to be captured in the information here. So while the computer puts Bethany Lutheran as a slight favorite, I think based on what we know of the overall situation, I think in our minds we would probably flip that.
I will tell you, I would like to play Hope again if it meant we could play more games. But other than that, I wouldn't be particularly interested in playing Hope again. I don't think anyone would be signing up for that. It feels like they're healthy-ish for the first time since like November, maybe even before the season started. They've been playing their best basketball the last 2 weeks, I think. I think we saw that too well firsthand. So I wouldn't be. You see them rated here number 103 by the efficiency ratings. That's taking a whole season into account. I would pick them higher than that right now. If you're looking for a kind of underseed to get out of their pod, maybe you're looking here. They have played Oshkosh, which would be a potential second round earlier in the season, and Oshkosh won that game in Holland. But the way I saw Hope play last weekend, they can hang with these teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if they end up on top here in game one. But I think that'll be a good matchup. I think Bethany Lutheran is one. Maybe you're not used to seeing a strong team out of Bethany Lutheran, but they've been good all year.
It'll be interesting there because I know a lot of people have noted the success Hope had controlling tempo, controlling the game against Calvin. But you look at Bethany Lutheran with the 78.8 adjusted tempo number there, and that's one of the higher numbers that we've seen. Not quite to the level of Rowan, but above average. So this could be a really interesting game to see who can get the game played at their tempo.
Yep, for sure.
Wisconsin Oshkosh and Fontbonne, not a lot to say. Kind of a typical top seed, lower seed situation here. A 97% win probability for Wisconsin Oshkosh, which goes even beyond some of the 95s we were seeing with other top seeds, and the 23.5 number on the computer line definitely reflects that. So moving on, North Park against Sewanee. This will be played at Wash U. Matt, I think we can confirm now that seating wise, this should have been at North Park.
Yeah.
But with geography in play, Sewanee can get to Wash U. That saves a flight. So this pod moves to Wash U. And as a result, North Park facing a potential true road game as the top seed. So kind of a tough break for them. This pod shapes up a little bit more as a straight, top two, bottom two. You see the computer line's a 14-point favorite. for North Park. Wash U actually just a 8.5 point favorite over Co, but still a solid favorite there. So likely setting up that game, North Park as the higher seed, having to play at Wash U.
Yeah, I think you're right. This was a geography seed. I think we saw the final regional rankings come out on Monday that had WashU third in the region and North Park second. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
But Sewanee being in the mix, one of the few places they can get to within 500 miles is St. Louis at WashU. So the pod moves there. We had wondered for a while throughout this process if the WashU women were going to have a priority to host and then um, have to move a WashU pod elsewhere. It turns out no, they weren't in position to host on the women's side, and in fact, they were the beneficiaries of a pod switch, possibly. I think by criteria standpoint, Sewanee and Co were maybe pretty similar, but I think North Park gets the advantageous first round matchup here. You can see from an absolute sense. Co playing in the American Rivers, just a tremendously even conference, top to bottom. There's really not a bad team in that whole league. So even though they were kind of a surprise team coming through that tournament as a lower seed, and they probably just didn't have the total NCAA resume, they were still a strong team. The computers see them as a strong team. So it'll be a more difficult first round matchup for WashU. So you kind of don't feel too bad for North Park. Yeah, they lose the right to host. You'd love to have that, but you get a little bit of a better matchup, and you're probably going to have to play WashU anyway in the second round. But hey, who knows? Maybe they get upset. You take care of business against Sewanee, and maybe you're looking at a second round game against Co, and then you don't mind it too much if you get to advance. It's going to be a great pod, potentially a really good second round matchup, CCIW UAA that you would love to see, but got to get through those first games first.
And a similar shape to the pod to round out the Rowan quadrant here, with pretty solid favorites in NYU, 9.5 point favorite over Lancaster Bible, and Mount Union as the host here, a 16.5 point favorite over Anderson. Um, NYU, I think, is one of those teams that's talked about as, kind of a matchup dependent team. Like they can have a lot of success depending on the matchup. Um, I think a potential game against Mount Union could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, would love to see that matchup. Assuming both of them get through their first round games, which isn't for granted, but they should be big favorites in both of those games. I
Right.
think that'd be a very good to see NYU play against the OAC. Early in the season, we had kind of dinged NYU because they play a lot of kind of like Skyline and Cognac opponents, and we didn't really know what to make of them until around New Year's when they played Roanoke, and they looked really good in that tournament against Hanover and Roanoke. And then they go through the UAA, struggle at the beginning, but then kind of maybe finish strong. So
Close out really well.
they've gone on through an UAA schedule, so they've played good, strong teams. Seeing them against Mount Union, who's probably as good as the top of the UAA, will be very interesting as well if that matchup happens. Also, a lot of purple in that matchup.
Yeah, indeed. All right, let's flip from the left side of the bracket to the right side. And I guess the way the bracket's set up, what you would consider the number 2 overall seed is Swarthmore. And they'll get their tournament started with SUNY Delhi. The computer likes SWAT as an 18.5 point favorite. Um, yeah, so not as overwhelming a favorite as some of the other top seeds we've seen, but pretty solid favorite nonetheless. Number 2, based on what it appears we see from the seeding or from the bracket here, but number 12 in overall efficiency ratings.
Yeah, my first reaction when the bracket was revealed was like, wow, that's a pretty soft pod for Swarthmore here. They maybe deserve it as a top seed, but I kind of figured St. John Fisher being a bid thief was kind of like a pod for Whitworth being a Pool A only candidate was probably like a number 4 in a pod. Um, SUNY Delhi obviously was going to be a number 4 in a pod. So you have like a bunch of 3s and 4s against Swarthmore here. So I didn't really see a true 2 necessarily in my mind of how I would read the NCAA criteria. It looks a little bit more balanced by the efficiency ratings, but not that much. Like a 72 and an 85 as your other two teams, I think still would well favor Swarthmore to come out of this. They should take care of business and get through this pod based on what we're seeing here on the strength of these other teams. I think that's a nice matchup, St. John Fisher and Whitworth, but it should be a matchup that Swarthmore gets through.
Yeah, but you go back and you compare it to what Randolph-Macon has in their pod as the top seed on the other side of the bracket, and it seems to track pretty well.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, the pod just below them will be played at Keene State, starting with Tufts and Widener. Tufts was always looking like a pretty strong Pool C candidate along the
Yep.
way, so I think they were pretty solidly in. They will be a 5-point favorite here by the computer over Widener, and then Keene State. Pretty typical to what we've seen. Some of the other top seeds, a 20.5 point favorite over Baruch.
Yeah, Tufts, a team that was kind of filtering in and out of my top 25 through parts of the year. You see them here at 27 in the efficiency rating, so just kind of like a fringe top 25 team. Pretty strong there. I have a good matchup against Widener. You'd expect Tufts to be able to come through, but it's kind of like a 2/3, 1/3 kind of a matchup. Keene State should take care of business against Baruch. Maybe uh, one of the knocks on Keene State's resume from an NCAA standpoint was that they were maybe lower on regionally ranked wins, although kind of through the season it was Western Connecticut falling out of that and Maryville coming into that. But we've seen them play, Maryville and Middlebury. That was a close game. So getting a chance to prove themselves through the tournament after the Little East maybe not being the strongest conference is again, I expect Keene State to make a deep run, but a potential second round matchup with Tufts. That'd be a game that you'd love to see.
Yeah, definitely, because that brings in the common opponent with Middlebury.
Middlebury.
Keene State played a great regular season game against Middlebury. They did lose in a thrilling game, um, but Tufts has beaten Middlebury,
Mm-hmm.
so that could be a very tough second round game. Maybe one of the tougher second round games for all the hosts
For a host,
that
yeah.
we'll see this weekend. So
Yep.
love to see. All right, moving on. Another team that we think was probably one of the last Pool C bids in. That's Rochester in another really even matchup, like we
Mm-hmm.
saw with Utica. They're um, slight underdogs to Nichols, just a half point on the computer line there. This pod is hosted at Middlebury. They will face Worcester State. Middlebury, a 12.5 point favorite on the computer line, and an 80% chance to advance based on the computer model.
Yeah, almost dead even matchup between Rochester and Nichols here. A half point favorite for Nichols, which might be a surprise to some people. The UAA Pool C is the underdog to the Commonwealth Coast winner. Nichols at 80.9 possessions per game, one of the faster teams we've seen. They like to push it. Rochester, not super slow, but likes to slow it down a little bit as far as from a tempo perspective. They're okay playing
Moderate
slower,
pace.
moderately
Yeah.
placed team. Yep. So this will be a good one. They're both, I think, relatively similarly shaped as far as their
Mhm.
offensive and defensive um, efficiencies. Now they might not play the same styles, but they're kind of similar quality overall in offense and defense. So definitely will be one to keep an eye on. It might be one of the better first round matchups as far as how things break down to the computers. So I think we'll just seeing how even this matchup is, knowing the discussion that went into the Rochester pick. If they were to lose a game to Nichols in the first round, I think you can just imagine the gnashing of teeth that will occur on our good friend social media about the whole thing. But it's, Rochester is kind of like a number 40 team's not an insane at large pick as far as overall quality. I think it has more to do with Nichols maybe being a little bit better from an overall sense than they are from like a criteria sense coming out of the Commonwealth Coast Conference.
But if Rochester does advance, that sets up a potential rematch from the regular season with Middlebury. It was Rochester that got a 2-point win back in the NESCAC UAA Challenge in early December. So that would be very interesting to see if that rematch did
Yep.
occur, especially you know, a- as the narratives have changed a little bit around these
Yeah,
two teams.
exactly. Yeah, but I don't think we want to take Middlebury's first round game for granted. An 80-20
No,
matchup.
no,
They're
no.
they're a favorite, but Worcester State, as far as teams playing against a host, that looks like um, a good matchup. They're gonna if Middlebury goes into the game looking at, hey, we have Rochester tomorrow, then it could be Worcester State that has Nichols the next day, right? You don't you
Yeah,
don't, don't you
yeah,
don't know.
yep, yep. And then the last pot in this quadrant will be at Stockton, and the neutral versus neutral matchup here is Mary Washington against St. Lawrence. Mary Washington, of course, the lone team to defeat number 1 overall seed Randolph-Macon this year. That's um, really the feather in their cap. A solid resume overall, but it feels like anytime you talk about Mary Washington, you have to bring up the fact that they have that win over Randolph-Macon. They're the only one to do it. 7.5-point favorites here over St. Lawrence. Teams that play basically at dead even tempos. So this is not one where anyone's going to be trying to dictate anything over the other. Both are going to be very comfortable at how this game settles in. They're going to be looking to play it at the same pace. But you have to look at Mary Washington as almost a 3/4, 1/4 favorite here, 73-27 on the win probabilities.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of quickly and stealthily check out what the over/under projection from the computer would be for this game, because I wouldn't be surprised if this has the lowest over/under projection for the entire first round games.
All right, while you do that, we'll talk about Stockton and LaRoche.
Okay.
You talked about Middlebury being one of the 12.5-point line there is a little bit small for hosts. Stockton just a 7-point favorite over LaRoche. LaRoche is a team in one of those conferences that's a little bit off the radar, but they did a good job taking care of business, and they're probably a stronger team than most people will give them credit for or realize.
Yeah, this will be this will, again, I'm going to say this 1,000 times. This will be a good one to watch. Obviously, Stockton, like we've said a few times, way better by the NCAA criteria than by the computer ratings. LaRoche playing in the what is it, the AMCC? Maybe sometimes an afterthought in their region that they weren't going to be in the regional rankings. I think that's a great one to watch. You could be seeing a host go down here, kind of almost a 2/3, 1/3 kind of a matchup here. LaRoche has a chance to maybe steal one. I do have the numbers on Mary Washington and St. Lawrence. Projected final score neutral site 58-52. A what is that, a 110 total, but that's that St. Lawrence number, a 95 offense, 88 defense. Mary Washington's even towards their defense. They both play a little slower. That's going to be a low scoring game. St. Lawrence is no stranger to that, playing in their conference. We've talked about teams like RPI in the Liberty League and how their defense was tight all season. That's how they're playing out there. So St. Lawrence is going to be no stranger to a defensive struggle if that's what it turns into. I would expect that would be a very low scoring game. And then I think that will contrast to whoever plays the Stockton LaRoche winner the next game, which will be probably a little bit more on the offensive side of things. So whatever the second game ends up in this pod, I think we'll see contrasting team styles.
All right, that's 3 quadrants down, 1 to go. This one turned out to be the Christopher Newport quadrant, although they do not get to host, which was expected with the women having priority this year. So the Christopher Newport quadrant kicks off with the Christopher Newport pod, which will be at Hampden-Sydney. Christopher Newport will get an opening round game against Farmingdale State, the champions of the Skyline, and they come out as a 90% odds to win this opening round game with a computer line of 15. And like we mentioned, at Hampden-Sydney, boy, they get rewarded with by geography, the hosting rights, but maybe they get penalized by geography with having to play Emory in the first round. But they, the computer likes their chances. This is kind of a 2/3, 1/3 in Hampden-Sydney's favor with a computer line of 8 points.
Yeah, this is a two birds, one stone situation for the committee. Christopher Newport can't host anyway because their women are hosting. Women's priority in the first weekend this year. So we can ship them to Hampden-Sydney. And oh, by the way, that's one of the only places that Emory can get to by bus in under 500 miles. So, hey, this all works out here. By seeding, it's a little bit strong, kind of like an NCAA criteria seeding. But by efficiency ratings, it's really strong. It's probably like the top 3. We probably have had pods, we actually see them on the screen that we don't have any teams in the top 25 in the efficiency ratings, and here we have three. So it's going to be a bloodbath for someone to get out of this. Even Farmingdale State as the four in this pod at a 113 rating is not the worst. They're a decent team. Christopher Newport being maybe a top 5 team in the country, they should be able to take care of business there. But this probably is maybe the strongest overall pod as far as top-notch quality here. So be fascinating to see who comes out of it. I think we'll see 2 good games and then another good game on Saturday as well here.
Which brings us to the Texas pod. A little bit unfortunate, but I think with realities in Division III being what they are, probably the committee's hands were tied here. Not surprising to see. We have 2 ASC teams, 2 SCAC teams, and so they just avoid the conference rematches, which actually does set up a regular season rematch between St. Thomas and East Texas Baptist. They met in the regular season and get stuck here playing again. Now the odds to advance here are 51% to 49% in East Texas Baptist favor, but the computer line couldn't even call it a half a point either way. So this goes down as a true pick'em game. And this pod will be hosted at Mary Hardin-Baylor. If we go back to the regional rankings that did release, I believe Mary Hardin-Baylor was behind St. Thomas, but it appears that for facility reasons, Mary Hardin-Baylor was chosen as the host. I don't know the exact seating capacity of St. Thomas. I know on video it appears they have a very small gym. As you watch a video, there's only seating on one side, so I don't know what the total capacity would be. Mary Hardin-Baylor with a very nice facility and being all Texas, I think the chance to draw a crowd probably won the day here. So it'll be at Mary Hardin-Baylor. They get Schreiner, the surprise SCAC winner. And unlike the pick'em game at the other game in this pod, Mary Hardin-Baylor is a solid 15-point favorite, 86-14% split on the win probability.
Yeah, you mentioned St. Thomas and ETBU being a rematch. I think that early season game was at St. Thomas, and St. Thomas won by 2. So you figure you throw that one on a neutral court maybe, and it's a really even matchup. The computers say it's an even matchup. So that'll be a fun one to watch. Again, I've said that 1,000 times. And then you would expect Mary Hardin-Baylor to get past Schreiner and set up kind of the Texas championship round, if you will, in the next matchup. We had said it in kind of our reactions pod. Would have been maybe nice if you could have flown East Texas Baptist out, use one more flight to fly in Cal Lutheran or someone into this pod. But it didn't happen. We're going to get the Texas here. Maybe, hopefully, the result is that it draws a crowd. But you can kind of see St. Thomas wasn't in the top 16 reveal that the committee had done a while ago. They didn't win their conference tournament. So even if they're the higher seeded team, they're probably a team that the committee didn't feel like they needed to protect that much if they weren't that high of an overall seed. So maybe Mary Hardin-Baylor gets the host for facility reasons, if that's what it is. St. Thomas gets a more difficult matchup against ETBU to switch up the conferences. So it could be you're the higher team in the region. You're not a top 16 overall quality. It's a geographic region anyway. So I'm sorry, but we're not going to go out of our way to protect you too much. And maybe that was part of it too.
Getting to the bottom half of the Newport quadrant here, we have Carleton against St. Norbert. That'll be on a neutral court. King Arena at Wheaton hosting this one. And Carleton, a slight favorite here, 55% on the win probability, 1.5 point favorite on the computer line. Really interesting matchup here, Wheaton and Illinois College. Illinois College has been one of those super high winning percentage teams, but the SOS was never going to be Pool C competitive. And the chance to do it against another Illinois team here is really interesting to me. They're going to be in big time prove it mode. The computer sees them as only a 6.5 point favorite with a 38% chance to escape the first round. Matt, what are you thinking in the Wheaton pod?
My first thought was overall this is a weaker pod. Second thought was Wheaton got the toughest draw in the pod as far as them being the top host. Like that's
Yeah.
not great. Um, should be a pod that they could get through, but I don't think they got advantageous matchups here by any stretch of the imagination. And then I was thinking, seeding wise, Illinois College has been, disrespected is the wrong word, but their criteria didn't allow them to be in the regional rankings. Or I guess how the committee interpreted the criteria didn't allow them to be in the regional rankings. And so you see a team like Carleton being ranked in the top three-ish or whatever, three or four, top half of their region. St. Norbert had snuck into the regional rankings, and Illinois College had kind of been on the outside. So from a seeding perspective, like I guess they're the four in the pod. But yeah, and you kind of feel bad for Illinois College getting Wheaton. You kind of, I would have loved to see St. Norbert and Illinois College be flipped in this one. It felt like that would have been a little bit better for me. Let Illinois College play Carleton, but they're going to have to prove themselves through Wheaton, and I guess you're going to have to play those teams eventually, so you might as well do it in the first game. But yeah, Illinois College, I think you tweeted it out. A team you'd like to root for, get the chance to prove themselves. Their criteria didn't stack up, but here's a chance to play the games, and it could be a fascinating one. 38% to win. Wheaton cannot take them lightly. I'm sure they won't. But I think Illinois College is a good team, and we might find that out this March.
Yeah, you have to say it's a tough draw for Illinois College because you look at the efficiency margin rank, they're the 2 seed in this pod, or should be the 2 seed in this pod. But then you also have to say, well, that's a tough draw for Wheaton.
Yeah,
because they're not getting a true 4. They're getting the second highest ranked team by efficiency margin. So really a tough draw for either way you want to look at it there.
Yep.
But hey, I wouldn't discount the possibility of Carleton coming out of this pod. So. Very, very evenly matched. I think this is going to be one. It's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yep.
Okay, last pod here, Matt. We have Pomona-Pitzer, another one of those West Coast teams getting flown all the way out to the East Coast. They're going to be in Hartford to play Williams at St. Joseph. So Pomona-Pitzer against Williams is a super interesting matchup. It's a great one to see in the tournament because it feels like the type of matchup we would never get anywhere else, and even kind of a pipe dream to even get in the tournament because usually Region 10 is left to fend for themselves and figure it all out, and before they get met up with the rest of the country. So that's why I really liked what we saw here from the at least the West Coast portion of Region 10. They got them totally out of there into areas of the country we don't usually see. So kudos to the committee for bracketing it that way. Really excited to see Pomona-Pitzer take on Williams. However, the computer pretty strongly likes Williams here with a 77% here to win the game and a 7.5 point favorite on the computer line. And then St. Joseph, Connecticut gets the hosting opportunity. They'll play Chatham in probably this probably is the biggest number we've seen of any first round matchup, right? I have to go back and check, but the 27.5 point computer line seems like it's the biggest we've seen, and certainly the 99% to 1% win probability chance there is definitely the biggest we've seen.
Yeah, I expect St. Joseph to be the victor there in that one. They're just coming off their first loss of the season, so who knows how they respond. I'm expecting them to respond well. Like I said, they're still one of my favorites in the entire tournament, I think, at this point, so would expect good things from St. Joseph. Pomona-Pitzer Williams, like you said, a great matchup. NESCAC versus SCIAC, like opposite corners of the country, if you want to think of it that way. For whatever reason, the computers have not really loved, or at least efficiency ratings have not really loved Pomona-Pitzer that much as maybe they're standing in that conference, or as some of the human voters have been voting for them. But this will be a great matchup. I've watched Williams a few times this year, and it feels like they'll play a really good game, and then they'll play one or two really bad games, and I'll watch them, and I'll just say, like, what is going on with Williams? It just doesn't seem like they're playing with a lot of physicality at times. They're can be maybe passive. I don't know. But the computers still really like them, so they've gotten the results. I don't know if it's a case of some of the scheduling kind of in the Northeast where they can maybe beat up on some teams, and if the computer likes that a little bit more than it should, whereas maybe Pomona-Pitzer has gone out and played some teams this year. They've played Wash U, they played, their local games are all SCIAC games. I don't
Very
know if
hard and Baylor went out there.
yeah, they played Murray Hard Baylor early in the season. So they played some teams. I don't know if that has a whole lot to do with it or not, but for whatever reason, they seem too low by the computer. I expect that to be a tighter game, but even still, a 7.5 point kind of computer margin is not a crazy big number. It would be a expectation that Williams would win, but that's a couple of shots here or there, and that's a ball game at the end. So I would expect that one to be tighter than that. If I was to pick this one on a pick slate, then I would pick. I would pick towards the Pomona-Pitzer line on that one.
Maybe a little bit of telegraphing there coming up here. But with St. Joseph, I think you can't look at losing the GNAC tournament championship as anything but a big disappointment for them. But I think I would hesitate to draw too many conclusions about that, or you got to think about what they did in non-conference play.
Yeah,
Like this,
right.
this is not a classic GNAC team that beat up on other GNAC teams and low-level competition around the Northeast. Like they've got wins over really good teams and teams that probably are better than their record shows because they're really strong programs playing in top conferences. You look at a win over Illinois Wesleyan, for instance, probably is a better win than it looks like just on the face of what Illinois Wesleyan's record was this year because of the schedule they played and the fact that they play in the CCIW. Wins over Tufts, UW-Oshkosh. Okay, these are all things we got to keep in mind. So yes, they stumbled in the GNAC, but this is a team that's already proven they can hang on a national level earlier in the season.
Yeah.
So really looking forward to seeing them get into national tournament play here. I know that's been a big focus for them as they've kind of quickly risen into the national prominence here. The one thing that they haven't done is won in the NCAA tournament. So not trying to excuse what happened against Albertus Magnus there in the GNAC championship, but I think once they got into past that non-conference schedule, this is the date that they were really looking forward to.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so that wraps things up, Matt. I think the only other comment I would have about this quadrant is, we call it the Christopher Newport quadrant because it appears they're the top seed here. But really, I think you call this the flight quadrant. It looks like however you want to pick the pods here. I'm not sure that there's going to be a team that geographically unifies anything here. I think you're looking at probably a host and a minimum of 2 flights. Maybe how it shakes out, one team will get there, but I don't really see anything here and think, based on the geography and kind of reasonable expectation for who comes out,
Yeah.
where this is going to be. I think this is probably going to be whoever's the top seed left, and it's going to be a lot of flights into that location.
Yep. Yep. I think you're right.
All right, so that wraps up the look at the bracket, at least for the first round. Toying with the idea of maybe taking a little bit more of a comprehensive look at some predictions and projections for the tournament here in a bonus episode later in the week, but we'll leave it here for now and get into our picks review from last week.
Last week's slate, picking the championship weeks. Our first game was Montclair State. They were 1.5 point underdogs at Stockton. We had both gone with Stockton, and that was correct. Stockton won by 5. Pick number 2 was Hood, 1 point underdogs at Widener. We both went to Widener. They won by 11. We both get that one. Ripon at Illinois College. Illinois College was a big favorite, 12 point. I went with the big number, and you picked Ripon taking the points. Ripon kept it within 6, so you get that one. Emory at Rochester, a regular season game to close out the UAA. That was a big one. It felt like a winner gets in, losers on the bubble. Well, both teams got in. Emory was 2.5 point underdogs. They won by 10, and so you get that one, Zach. I missed that one. The last game was in the NESCAC tournament, Tufts and Hamilton. Hamilton really dominated this one, won by, I think that says 23 points. Tufts was 5-point favorites. We both missed that one. We were on the wrong side of it. Hamilton looked really good in that tournament, and they won that game. So that takes us to the overall season um, leaderboard here. You were 4-1 last week. Great week for you. 38-36. I was 2-3. 39-35. Just one game ahead now, Zach.
I finally got over that 500 mark, so the next milestone is to catch up and surpass you. So we have to keep this picks contest going at least until I can overtake you.
And then it ends, right?
Yeah, stop the count.
So that review being done, we go to this week's pick slate. And these are just first round games because we don't know the future. So we're picking just first round games this week. Hope you play along with us. The first game we're picking is Rochester versus Nichols. Rochester is a 0.5-point favorite. We had looked at that game earlier. Zach, who do you like in this one?
I know Rochester's inclusion was a bit controversial for some because of that low winning percentage, but I don't have a huge problem with it. And I think what they were able to do with that winning percentage, the teams that they beat along the way within that strength of schedule was impressive. I will take them here. Basically, with the 0.5 point, it's a pick 'em to me. I'll take Rochester to beat Nichols.
Yeah, I went the same way as you on this one, although I don't feel great about it. We just looked at Nichols and how even these two teams were. I feel like it's a pick 'em. So I'll be honest, I went with the big conference team over the smaller conference team, and maybe that's not a good explanation, but that's what I did. But I think this is going to be a great one to watch. Second game is UW-Whitewater, 4-point favorites versus Wabash. Zach.
Yeah, I don't know that I would go with Wabash as an outright winner, but I think this is a really great matchup. Um, I'm impressed with Whitewater's run to the WIAC championship, but with the 4-point numbers are just a little bit too big for me, especially it seems like Wabash is really used to playing close games. They're offensively gifted, so I like this to be more like a one possession game.
Yeah, I'm going to go against you on this one and take UW-Whitewater. I think Whitewater's been playing really well recently, not just the WIAC tournament, but even in kind of the closing maybe half or so of the WIAC regular season. 4 points more than a possession's getting to be a fairly big number here, but I think I'm gonna trust Whitewater here to get the cover even over 4 points. Our third pick, we teased this a little bit. Pomona-Pitzer, 7.5-point underdogs versus Williams. Zach, your pick.
And this is one that was just a little bit shocking to me to see the number come out to be 7.5 here. So I I think it's probably just a lack of trust in Williams, and I see this as a closer game or more even game than 7.5. So that feels like an easy one to take the number here.
Yeah, similar for me. Maybe it was just watching Colby absolutely wipe the floor with Williams. But I feel like 7.5 is just too big. Maybe Williams wins. Who knows? It's a long way out there for Pomona-Pitzer, but 7.5 feels like too big of a number to me at this point. So I will go with Pomona-Pitzer. Our fourth game, St. Thomas, Texas, is a pick'em against East Texas Baptist. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, I mentioned this one earlier too. It's a rematch. St. Thomas did win that first game, but I'm going to go with East Texas Baptist in the pick'em here. Um, St. Thomas has had a great season. They looked really good throughout in terms of the criteria, but East Texas Baptist has been hanging around kind of that fringe top 25 area for a lot of the season too. I'm just going to put a little bit more weight in them getting through the ASC the
Yeah.
way that they did. And who knows, this is going to be a neutral site game, but it's going to be played in an ASC facility, maybe a little bit of familiarity there for ETBU. So I'll take them on the pick 'em.
Yeah, for me, maybe this is an unfair analysis. I'm also going to take East Texas Baptist, by the way. But my perception is maybe that East Texas or St. Thomas maybe survived their conference, and that kind of kept them higher rated, whereas East Texas Baptist um, maybe made a push through their conference and through the conference tournament, and um, it felt like, yeah, to me, it just felt like St. Thomas had maybe spent the last few weeks hanging on to where they were in the position where East Texas Baptist was kind of probing at that a little bit more. Maybe that's completely unfair, but that kind of you just have a different feel for these two teams coming into this game. Feels like maybe East Texas Baptist is moving forward and maybe St. Thomas is not. opportunity to prove that wrong. But that's it for me. I'm going to go to East Texas Baptist on this one. And then our final game in one of the most stacked pods in the country, I think, in round one, Emory is playing at Hampden-Sydney. Emory is 8-point underdogs. Who do you like in this one, Zach?
Well, last week I said I feel like Emory always does the opposite of what you think they're going to do, and so that's why I picked them against Rochester. And look what happened. I got that one right, and here they are in the tournament as a result, perhaps. So maybe I'm going against my better judgment here, but the 8-point number is surprisingly big, like we talked about with the 7.5 with Pomona-Pitzer and Williams. So I'm going to take the 8 points with Emory.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with this one at first. At first, I wanted to pick Hampden-Sydney. It's at their place. I feel like Emory maybe had a weak second half or so of UAA play overall, even though they got that win over Rochester at the end. And then I thought, like, man, they won so many close games. Can they keep doing that? But then I thought, well, they kept all of those games close as well. So maybe one of their superpowers is being able to stay in the mix and pull it out at the end of the game. So I was just thinking, Emory is tested through a strong conference. I know it is at Hampden-Sydney, but the 8 points in the end was just too big. I think Emory can keep it close, even if they don't ultimately win the game. Who knows what's going to happen there? I think 8 points was just too big for me to pick against. So I will pick Emory in that matchup.
So you realize what we just set up here, Matt, right? We agreed on 4 picks with one different. It comes down to UW-Whitewater and Wabash. So
True.
either I close the gap to 0 or you double that 1-game lead heading into the second weekend of the tournament.
So can we end if it's tied, or do we have to do another week if we're still tied? Who knows?
Who knows? You'll have to tune in next week to see if we have another slate.
All right, that brings us to the mailbag.
It does. We have a doozy here, Matt.
Okay.
Um, and so this comes courtesy of Barry head coach Mick Hedgepeth, and he put this out here, and he tagged us on it. We responded that we would cover it in the mailbag here. So I'm gonna kind of read the whole thing verbatim just to set the stage a little bit. So he says, not a big social media guy, but here's my case for our team for at least considering making adjustments to D3 regional rankings and Pool C criteria for the NCAA tournament. We have a 25-3, 16-1 record and are ranked number 22 nationally. That's on the D3hoops.com top 25. Even after today's loss in our conference championship game, we are ranked number 33 via Massey ratings. In D3 men's basketball, there are 10 regions. 9 regions have 7 regionally ranked teams, and 1 region has 6, totaling 69 regionally ranked teams. We have never been regionally ranked and have slim to no chance of receiving a Pool C bid to the NCAA tournament due to not being regionally ranked. This is primarily due to a low strength of schedule. Even though our non-conference schedule SOS is 521, as we played and won at Emory, ranked 3rd in our region, and Maryville, ranked 6th in our region, as well as neutral site games versus Hampden-Sydney, ranked 4th in our region, number 20 nationally, and number 16 on Massey, and Roanoke, number 18 on Massey. The only part of scheduling we can control is our non-conference schedule. We're considered an outlier in the regional rankings due to low overall SOS. But what about having the second highest winning percentage in our region? What about being one of only 3 teams with winning records versus regionally ranked opponents in our region? How are we ranked 22nd and 23rd nationally, but not in our own region? How does that mathematically make sense? Is SOS the singular most important criteria? That sure seems to be the case. We have not had a bad loss all season. Losing to a 19-9 Sewanee team at the end of a conference tourney championship game is not a bad loss. How many teams in the country went undefeated in conference play? How many teams that are regionally ranked or will receive Pool C bids have worse losses than us? Does winning games actually matter? Do bad losses matter? I know. We should have won our conference championship game, scheduled harder, which is difficult to do a year in advance, hard to predict how strong other teams will be, mostly limited to schools in your geographic area, budget limitations, and we played the best teams in our surrounding area. Again, we are ranked number 22 in the country and number 33 in the country by certain criteria. None of these ranking mechanisms is strictly number based, too, providing we rank in the top 33 nationally from a statistical standpoint, yet have never been ranked in our own region, in which we have beaten two of the best 6 teams and had our 3rd loss of the season to a really good team that we had already beaten twice on February 26th. It just seems to me something doesn't add up. Now, Matt, I think just we don't want to make this strictly about Barry. Now, to uh, so there was another tweet that came out that I think kind of fits in this, and I wanted to highlight that here too. This comes from Randolph-Macon head coach Josh Merkel, who tweeted this out prior to the bracket reveal, saying, "If Guilford is not in the tourney, then the system needs to be tweaked. We can't leave out one of the best teams in the country. Hopefully, the NCAA and those that make decisions can make some positive changes." Now, of course, since that came out, Guilford has in fact missed the NCAA tournament. Um, and so what's interesting is I of course fan banter, coaches advocating for their team, like none of that is new, but I feel like this year more than ever before we're seeing, I don't know if criticism is necessarily the right word, but critique or questioning of the system.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily even criticism of the committee, but more of the tools that they're
Yeah.
given to work with. And in fact, I've heard comments both from both committee chairs, Sarah Quattrocki on the men's side, Megan Wilson on the women's side, who have straight up said that they don't think the criteria is, in some cases, all that good. Maybe that's a really rough paraphrase, but I don't recall in all the committee chair interviews that I've heard on Hoopsville in the past, I don't ever recall this much uh, acknowledgement from committee chairs, and we see it here from coaches, that just draws into question uh, if the task that the committee is being asked to do um, is being done in a way that it should be done. Now, we've seen changes to the system. The old QOWI has given way to what we have now. So there have been changes in the past, and I just wonder if we're kind of on a fulcrum point towards whatever the next change may be. Because first of all, you have to understand that there's a set of criteria, and that is what is driving these decisions. It doesn't seem like what Mick is saying here is casting aside those criteria. It seems that he understands this, but he doesn't agree with it. And I have to say, from my own observation and what we've done and discussed on the show here, um, I feel like we have a good understanding, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for disagreeing with what's being done, how it's being done, or the metrics that are being used or being given to the committee to
Right.
use in this process.
Right. We talk about the primary criteria. Winning percentage is one of those, very important. Strength of schedule is another one of those, very important. And I think you and I, Zach, can both agree that those two pieces of criteria always need to be contextualized with one another. Now, the way that the criteria are given to the committee, they're not in any way related to each other. Those two pieces, it's you evaluate a winning percentage and you evaluate a strength of schedule. Now they have to do a work of figuring out like what kind of ratio do they want that to be. That's not prescribed to them. They have to kind of figure that out. They also have results versus regionally ranked opponents, which in a lot of ways are baked into those other two numbers we talked about. It already affects your winning percentage. It already affects your strength of schedule. So it can maybe be used to add color to your resume. It's kind of like a metric of, do you have good wins, right? Which kind of makes sense. If you're trying to select teams into a tournament, you want to look at, do you have good wins? But again, how to use that criteria, I don't believe, is really prescribed to the committees. So they kind of have to look at that and decide, does that outweigh other factors? Um, and then again, I think common opponents and head-to-head competition also makes sense, but still, to what degree do you use those to elevate a team who's maybe beaten an Emory or beaten other top teams in their region? When do you use that to kind of pass a team or not pass a team? That's up to a committee's judgment on a case-by-case basis. Some of that might be good, but a lot of that might be leaving a committee to wish they had a little bit more framework. And all this to say, this is also kind of regionalized criteria. We talk about regionally ranked opponents and ranked within your own region. And then we do selections nationally, kind of on a regional board system, right? Like we did on Hoopsville. Um, but we've heard committees I think Sarah has said this. We know Mike Schauer has said this in his Hoopsville interview this season in his capacity now as a head coach. That one thing he learned through the committee chair role last year was, hey, I wish there was some sort of national piece of criteria that we could use to compare teams across regions or regions together that we don't really have right now. So I think one of the big things that both Mick and Josh are saying here, if I can interpret it, is not that, like you said, the committees are doing a bad job with the tools they're given necessarily, but that maybe we should look at these tools and decide if we want a new system for our division that can help some of these things. I think it's been like you said, maybe reaching a little bit of a boiling point kind of this year, maybe more fervor than we've seen in the past. I think the change to 10 regions from 8 has helped make this more of an issue. We have more regions. We have more of those lines across the country where teams are either just above the line, right? Like you're either number 7 in your region or you're number 8. You're either ranked or you're unranked. So we have more of those. Last year we had a lot more teams ranked per region, which felt like too many at the time. This year we have fewer. So now we're getting good teams like Barry probably would have been ranked last year. This year they're not. And so it feels better to be ranked. It feels better to be able to evaluate your case against a bunch of better teams rather than just like these few that happen to be above the line. So I think those have kind of contributed, those factors have contributed to the system, which we've had for several years now, becoming um, more disagreeable to some because I think we see the disparity among regions. These two coaches both coach in Region 6. It's one of the deepest regions in the country, even though they have 7 regionally ranked teams like the other regions. It felt like it wasn't enough just because of the quality of the teams in that region. And good teams are getting left out, which means if you played a good team, then you either didn't get a regionally ranked win or you did, but it's like a number 7 or number 6 in the region and doesn't look that good nationally. And without that national comparison tool, it can be challenging for the committees. So I definitely get where they're coming from. I think and I get what Mick's saying about we can only control our non-conference schedule. We can't control our conference schedule. I would maybe argue there's a couple of those games that could have been better on the Barry schedule. I think going forward to get a better SOS, maybe don't play Huntington twice out of conference.
Once
What? Maybe
or
don't
even
play.
once.
Yeah, maybe don't play them once. If you have aspirations of being in the regional rankings, right? And all like you said, you don't know if a team's going to be good or bad if you're scheduling a year or more in advance. I know coaches hate scheduling. It's difficult. You got to find another team who wants to play you. And are we going to do a home and home? And what's our travel budget? And there's a whole bunch of considerations. So it's easy for you and me to go and say, go up and play Rochester, right? Like, but Barry can't do that. At least not every year. Teams have limitations. But maybe there's some other things that you can do or look at doing or start contacting these coaches that are in the same boat as you and say, hey, let's try to get our strength of schedule up by playing each other. Maybe that can happen. Unfortunately, that increases travel, and then to what degree is that like for or against the Division III philosophy if it's too much travel? And I also get that maybe Barry's a little bit more geographically isolated than some others in the Northeast, let's say, so it's harder to get games within a drivable distance. So there's a lot of factors here. I think we both agree that we would like some tweaks in the system, particularly around, I think maybe I'm speaking for only myself here, around the regionally ranked opponents criteria, the good wins factor. What can we do to not feel like we're double counting and maybe make that a little bit more national? I think that would go a long ways. I should also say, as we're recording this on what day is it? Monday evening, there was a Hoopsville episode where he talked to both committee chairs, and they both hinted at the championships committee maybe looking at a pairwise system for rankings coming to Division III. So we have to figure out what all that means. But I think that would make some of these things a little bit more objective and maybe take out like a regionally ranked opponent's piece. We'll have to figure that out. But there could be a different system coming, which may or may not address some of these concerns. I'm not sure how that'll look.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out too is that, the NCAA is not some, shadowy figure, shadowy dictator. The NCAA is the institutions collectively, right? So I think it's important. Whatever channels exist for coaches and other, maybe ADs, other stakeholders to be able to provide this kind of feedback to say, hey, we don't think the criteria that leads to what is currently being used as an NCAA tournament resume is the best way.
Yeah.
We don't think it's
Yeah.
adequately representing teams, or can have a tendency to not adequately represent certain teams. Um, I, whatever those channels are in that process is, I think it's important for, coaches to be working through those, whether it's, whoever's heading up their region's rack. I know, we've mentioned that both committee chairs have voiced their concerns that they don't think the criteria is the best. And I know Sarah's talked about the possibility of maybe being on a championships committee in the future. So that's what gives me hope that these people that do recognize these limitations will be taking it multiple steps further to hopefully implement some change so that we can get some improvement. Because I think, no one wants a system that isn't working how they feel it should, right? I think,
Yeah.
but maybe Guilford is a real outlier, and you don't expect that kind of thing to happen every year. But at the same time, when you have a situation where, hey, this team by most metrics is one of the best teams in the country, yet when we put together the NCAA resume, they're not really.
Yeah.
I don't want to say they weren't viable, but they were fringe at best, right?
Yeah.
So hey, let's take a look. Is what we're trying to do actually being accomplished in the ways that we're implementing here? So I think that's what gives me hope, and my encouragement to Mick and others is, hey, provide that feedback,
Yeah.
and you know hopefully we can see some change in the right direction. Now, Matt,
Yeah.
I know that we didn't want to make this too much just about a Barry analysis, but ultimately different teams come to different resumes in different ways. And so just by way of comparison, I know you put together kind of a group, and we can take a look at them that way. um well, actually, I also want to point out, with only 20 pool C bids, it's a very selective window,
Yeah.
with over 400 teams competing in men's basketball in Division 3.
Yeah.
You're talking about a very, very small group. It's
Right.
hard to get a pool C. You
Mhm.
got a big field, and there's not many picks to go around. So,
And we talked about this offline, but there's been, like we were just saying, there's been a higher fervor of this year. Probably being so many upsets and bid thieves and so many good resumes being left on the table probably contributes to that. Like, hey, why is, you know, Guilford or UW Lacrosse or someone being left out? They maybe would have had a lot better chance if we had only had, two, three, four upsets in the conference tournament. We had a whole bunch, which I think just brings it to the forefront of like, hey, are these kind of the teams that we're wanting to pick over these other teams? Like you were saying before.
all right, so Matt, let's go through. You picked out,
Mhm.
as just kind of a comparison here. We've got Barry, Calvin, Guilford, and Rochester. So we've got uh, two teams that we didn't, had really good winning percentages that we didn't, as the came down to the kind of the final weeks here, we didn't really believe had super viable pool C chances. Guilford was maybe a little bit more of a fringe case, and then there was Rochester, who didn't get in, and then there was Rochester, who was seen as a fringe case primarily because of a low winning percentage, who did get in.
And these are all teams that were in or around the top 25 discussion for most of the year. So, not exactly the same quality, but kind of similar qualities, similar ranges of qualities of teams, right? So that we're kind of looking at here. So I just grabbed some stuff. Coach had mentioned Massey ratings and things. So I just looked at what are these teams um, best wins by Massey ratings, what are their worst losses by Massey ratings. Not really to try to prove any sort of point, but just to kind of see and kind of compare. Obviously, like you said, Barry, Calvin, Guilford did not make the tournament. Rochester did make the tournament. So Barry had beaten Emory, like a number 25 Massey team, Maryville a number 76, and Sewanee number 155. That's their three best Massey wins. Calvin has UW-Oshkosh and then Trine twice. Guilford had Hampden-Sydney, Roanoke, and Emory. And Rochester had Case, Western Reserve, Middlebury, and NYU. So just looking across the list, Emory was regionally ranked. Maryville, I think, ended up regionally ranked. Oshkosh ended up regionally ranked. Hampden-Sydney did, Roanoke didn't, Emory did, and then Case, Middlebury, and NYU all did. If you look at these opponents, between the teams that were regionally ranked or weren't regionally ranked, there's not necessarily a huge difference, maybe besides Sewanee, as far as overall quality. It just what region were they in, and did they kind of make the cut or did they not make the cut? Trine was another one of those low SOS teams that seemed to kind of get eliminated rather than having the winning percentage kind of have a chance to shine through. So you can see some of the differences there. Also took a look at just who are the teams that they lost to, what are their three worst losses, and what does that look like from a Massey sense. So Barry had also lost to Sewanee in that championship game, number 155. That's probably the worst loss on this list. He had said, there's no bad losses. I'd maybe say from a pool C kind of a bubble perspective, maybe that is a bad loss. But then the other losses, are not. Roanoke and Hampden-Sydney, very good teams. Tons of teams lost to those. Calvin lost to Hope twice. Win the conference championship, get the pool A, and you're in, right? So that's the argument for all these teams, I think. And then they lost to Worcester, number 38. Guilford had lost to NC Wesleyan, who's in the tournament at number 55 on Massey, then Hampden-Sydney and UW-La Crosse as their three kind of lowest ranked losses. And Rochester, not a super impressive list of bad losses. They lost to Hobart, number 103, Chicago, number 98, and Brandeis, number 78. Kind of feels like games like, hey, maybe a bubble team should win if they're going to get into the tournament. But Rochester had some that they didn't. So just against the Massey top 50, Barry had 1 win, 2 losses. Calvin was 3-3, Guilford was 4-5, and Rochester was 5-6. And then I just extended that to the Massey top 100 to see if we could catch a few extra games. Barry was 2-2, Calvin was 4-6, Guilford was 5-5, and then Rochester. This is where they really stood out. It seemed like they had a bunch of additional wins, kind of in the 50 to 100 range, probably mostly in the UAA play, where they picked up kind of 9 Massey top 100 wins there that the other teams didn't necessarily have. And then just at the bottom there, their NCAA criteria, you can see, Barry and Calvin, maybe 2 different versions of a similar thing. 800 plus winning percentage, Barry near 90%, but SOSs either just at or kind of below 500, only 2 regionally ranked wins. Guilford had a more even resume, a more kind of pool C viable resume across the board, but again, only 2 regionally ranked wins, even though their strength of schedule is pretty good and their winning percentage was good enough across most regions, right? This was not a pool C resume. And then Rochester had only won 64% of their games, and but a 629 strength of schedule, and the 10-6 versus regionally ranked opponents seemed to outweigh the fact that they hadn't won as many games. So that's always the discussion of, Rochester, by some measurements, played the most good teams, so they're probably going to take the most losses along the way. But if you look at the top 100 losses, they only had 1 more loss there than Calvin did. They only had 2 more losses there than Guilford did, and yet we're making up for a big difference on the winning percentage line. So that I think that's kind of the discussion that maybe these coaches are having. Like, is there really that big of a difference between what Rochester did and what Barry and Calvin and Guilford did? Is that what we want to happen in the process? Are there tweaks that we can propose so that we can adjudicate some of these games differently and look at these resumes differently? Probably what we have here on the screen doesn't give a complete picture of all these teams' resumes, but it's kind of a look at some of the different types of teams that maybe hit the board or hit the regionally rankings, and how the criteria breaks down versus who they happen to play or not play.
Yeah, and this is where for me with Rochester, you look at that top 100 being 14-7, and you can say, yeah, in the loss column, it's not that much different than a Kelvin or Guilford, but that 14 number really jumps out, and to the point where you can look at their worst losses and say Hobart, Chicago, Brandeis. You would think a bubble team would win those, but then you look at that 14-7 mark, and that says, yeah, they actually mostly are winning those games. It's just that
Yeah.
they open themselves up to a lot more games against that type of competition. So, with the 14-7 mark, if those other teams were playing 20 games inside the top 100, would that top 100 record still be looking like a around 500? And even if it is, that's where you see the winning percentage comes down, the SOS comes up, and the committee's job, I think, needs to be how do you balance those.
Yeah.
And getting back to to coach's point, I understand the frustration. Winning percentage is a primary criteria. They have a great winning percentage.
Yeah.
And then talking about, like, they played a lot of, they played good teams within their region. Emory, Maryville got ranked. Roanoke was kind of right there with Barry. We're always, one of the other teams we were kind of debating at the bottom of that region there, in Hampden-Sydney. Um, especially with the wins over Emory and Maryville. I mean, I can see
Yeah.
how they had some good marks in their favor, with SOS being the one that's being below, and a year where it seems like SOS has really been favored. Now, I will say, with where Barry's SOS is below 500, that's classically been problematic. So even forget about
Yeah.
what we've observed as a shift even further in the direction of SOS. I think even kind of keeping that in line with what we've seen historically, that SOS is still problematic. It's more where you get to the Guilford, where I feel like in years past, you've got that winning percentage approaching 800 and an SOS number of
550.
551. Like, you show me those numbers, and I say it's an easy pool C, every day. Now, with so much carnage in on the bubble with what happened in conference tournaments, maybe it's, just the wrong year to have that kind of thing happen, for a team like Guilford. Under a normal circumstance, or like last year where there were a few conference tournament upsets, maybe we're not having this conversation about Guilford, because
Yeah.
that, Pool C isn't being taken up by teams like St. Joseph, Connecticut, and maybe, you know uh, a Wheaton, or, just however you want to uh, view some of those teams that fell. Well, not Wheaton, because North Park won it anyway, but you get my point. There was a lot of bid thieves this year.
Yeah.
So if you take some of those out, maybe we're not having this conversation about Guilford. But still, in a classic sense, 786, 551, wins over teams like Emory, Hampden-Sydney, you wouldn't think Guilford would have a problem getting in.
Yeah.
But that, 498 with Barry, that's kind of always been danger zone.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to be cynical in response, for Barry, it's like, hey, get in line. The line starts at Guilford, right? And then Calvin's there, and then Barry's there. Like, these are all teams that are quality, that just, for whatever reason, by the criteria, just didn't stack up this year. Um, and it's unfortunate we have two teams in the top 25. Um, yeah, I know that's not criteria, but two teams in the top 25 that aren't going to be able to participate in the tournament. Um, so good, bad, I don't know. It's for these teams, these schools, their athletic departments, their whatever input they have to the championships committee to decide, do we want to tweak the system? And I think, like you said, it's not necessarily, there are fair, criticisms or critiques of maybe what the national committee has done this year. I think that's fine. I've participated in that at times, but I think what we're getting at is more to do with, are these the five primary criteria we want to move forward to, or do we want to tweak those criteria or define those criteria in some way that changes how we're valuing these things? And I think that's where the discussion is more productive, of how do we want this system to continue and grow in the future, from QOWI to strength of schedule, regionally ranked opponents, to whatever's next. And hopefully we're advancing the system and not making it worse. Unfortunately, we keep going back to this, only 20 Pool C in the tournament currently. That number might even shrink as conferences add in the future, right? Um,
Although I think we're projected to go to 21 next year,
I
weren't
think
we?
I think we'll go
Looking at that year.
21, and then maybe back to 20, and then who knows? So maybe it'll stay, but that's not a lot. I think, unfortunately, there's gonna be some good teams that get left out. We did the exercise on our bonus episode that launched on Monday of taking, like, kind of the computer ratings Pool C, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Barry was actually on either of those lists. So they're a good team, but maybe not even quite like you're the 20 best teams by the computer that didn't get in. Now, so you could get some sort of approach that says, but a team like Rochester didn't have the winning percentage to qualify, and all that's fine. But at some point there's going to be a line. At some point there's going to be good teams that don't make it. The discussion is, are we measuring the right things for the right teams in the right way, and is that what we want to do going forward?
Maybe we'll take a off-season episode and we'll refine the process and come up with the perfect system. How about that?
That sounds difficult. All right.
Okay, we did have one more mailbag question. This came as a comment on our bracket reveal reaction episode. It comes from Ryan D. What chance does Tufts have against Keene State in a potential second round game? I like the Jumbo's chances to get to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, we're hoping you kind of tease this. We're hoping to maybe do a more advanced analysis and picks and predictions episode. I did look quickly at kind of some numbers I had put together for kind of tournament predictions. Keene State is the favorite out of that pod, definitely, but Tufts has some sort of a shot. I think my computer numbers, if I can find it quickly, gives Tufts about a 25% chance to reach the Sweet 16. So not as high as you maybe think. Keene State is the favorite there, but maybe 1 out of 4 times it's tough. So that's kind of the quick, not really deep dived into it on my end yet. Math answer on Tufts chances there.
Well, and they go up if they beat Widener. Part of those
Yeah.
odds are taking
Yep.
into account the
Right.
fact that they could lose to Widener. So, once you get to a Tufts Keene State matchup, you'd expect it to be something. Tufts chances would be something greater than 25%.
Correct. Yep.
Still an underdog, but we can cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah. Although there's some chance also baked in that Keene State happens to lose to Baruch, and if that happens, then Tufts becomes big favorites over Baruch. So some of that's baked in a little bit. But yeah, we could hopefully we'll do an episode where we could break down some of these predictions and projections as well. The difficulty would be though playing at Tufts, right? Do I have that correctly? Or sorry, at Keene State.
At Keene State, yep.
That would make things a little bit more difficult. First game being neutral site. Second game would be a true road game if you played Keene State. So that would tip a little bit into Keene's advantage. But something from now, maybe like a 1/4 chance looks correct.
That's it for the mailbag. If you have a mailbag question or comment that you would like us to address in a future episode, you can leave a comment here on this episode and we will grab it for our next show. And you could also get to us on Twitter at D3Datacast or Facebook Facebook.com/D3Datacast and leave a comment there and we can pick it up and answer it in the next show.
Good job, team.